Hello and welcome to the part number 35 of the Node Editor tutorial series. My name is Pavel Křupala from blenderfeed.com, and today in this part we are going to start with the events for the item selection and deselection. We will clean up our graphical node, our graphical edge, and we will make them notify the graphic scene with the PyQt signals to be able to listen to them in our scene, to be able to handle the item selection and deselection. So I hope you are excited, and let's start coding. So first of all, let's find out what we want to actually achieve. So if we open a file, when we click several times, the selection has changed, and that's definitely not true because we didn't have selected anything. And even if we click on the node, the selection doesn't change, which is not true. Also, we moved with the node, and here is the selection. So when we click somewhere else, we should have selection changed also. So first of all, we got node moved and selection changed. So let's find out when we are storing actually node moved. And that's here. Also, we got selection changed. And let's have a closer look what's actually going on. So the node graphic node got mouse release event, obviously, and when it was moved, then we are resetting the flag and storing history node moved. That's correct. At the node graphic view, we are storing selection changed. When rubber band dragging rectangle was true, then we are resetting this flag. So let's move it up and storing selection changed. And this is being set anytime we press on left mouse button press when the item is none and the control key wasn't being held down. So in this time, the rubber band dragging rectangle is being set to true, because we are handling this logic for the dragging selection which we were using. But this is definitely not correct. So first of all, it would be nice to know, at least for the graphics node and also the graphic edge, if something or some edge or some node was selected. So to have a function, something like, let's call it onSelected. So define onSelected and print out grnode onSelected. And also copy this function to the edge and rename that to grEdge because it's gonna be the same. I kinda do not like the constructor, how it's being started to be messy a little bit. So we can cut these two lines, put them together here, and we can move this logic into separate functions. So define init sizes, and we can cut all of these variables here. Also, we can cut this and create a new function. Let's call that init assets. Move it like this, and we need to call them. So self.init sizes and self.init assets. Init sockets, this comment doesn't make sense because we actually do call the functions with the same name, and we are initializing title and sockets and content, and we got init UI. So let's cut these lines and move them into init UI. And this function is somewhere down here, and our coding standards do say that we want to have init UI just below the constructor, so it makes a little bit more sense. So this way we can clean it up In the first place, in the constructor, we should init our flags, and let's pretend again that this is gonna be protected, so start with underscore. And also we are breaking our coding rules because we should write this with the underscores in the name. So I will press Shift F6 and rename that to underscore was moved, like this. And for the graphic node and also the edge, we should keep track of the last selected state, so define underscore last selected state. That's gonna be by default false, and we can copy this also to the node graphic edge somewhere here. We can do the same cleanup here, so define init assets and just copy paste all of this stuff somewhere here. Okay, then we are setting flag and C value. That's basically the init UI. So self init assets and self init UI, and the init UI should be first function. So define init UI with like this. Also, no, I did the other thing. So init our flags, init our variables, then init the assets and init UI. So this way it looks a little bit cleaner. We can now collapse the init UI and init assets, and we got onSelected, we got our last selected state, but actually we do not override the mouse release event at all. So let's quickly do that for the edge and put it just or maybe below the onSelected. So define mouse release event, and this is taking event variable. So we do want to keep all what's happening definitely. So mouse release event and pass event, call the parent super method mouse release event, and then we can compare our actual selected state with our last selected state, and if that's true, we are going to call the onSelected function. So you can basically say if self dot underscore last selected state doesn't equal to self dot is selected. In this case, we wanna definitely reset the flag. So last selected state is gonna be self dot is selected, and we are going to call the self on selected method we created just a few moments ago. So the same thing needs to go to also to the graphic node. So let's go to the node. Here is onSelected. Here we got mouse move event, and here is mouse release event. So if the node was moved and if self underscore last selected state doesn't equal to self is selected, reset the flag and again do onSelected or call the onSelected. So that means when we run now and open example and I select edge, if I manage to click it, yes, now I have gr edge onSelected. Let's try to click that again, nothing is happening, and gr node selected, and nothing is happening again. So that's nice, and now we know that the gr edge and gr node were selected. Okay, so we got working the node and the edge on selected, but this isn't good enough, because if we got first node selected and select the another one, just the another one will be also flagged as selected, and the first one will remain to be selected. So somehow when we select a node, we should notify other nodes and other edges that they have been actually deselected. And we do not have in our graphical scene the list containing all of the nodes and edges, but we do have it in our scene itself. So instead of putting that into graphical scene, I'm going to implement that into the scene itself. So here we have init UI, and init UI I will move that again just below the constructor. And here we have add edge, add node. Okay, so probably here would be a good place. So I will write a comment here. So custom flag to detect node or edge has been selected. Just to know that this function will tackle this issue, so define reset last selected states. And here we can go through each node and through each edge. So for node in self.node, and we can ask node grnode dot underscore last selected state and set it to false. And the same thing will go for the edges also. So for edge in self.edges, edge.grEdge underscore last selected state is gonna be false also. So this way we can notify all other elements that we actually selected a node. So here we got on selected, and we need to definitely reset the state before we set up the new. So let's put it here first. So self dot, and we are in the graphical node. So self dot node dot scene dot reset last selected states, and copy this thing to the edges also. So before we reset the flag, self dot edge dot scene reset last selected states. And this way we should be able to have correct values in all of the nodes and all of the edges. And now what we can do is to figure out what to do on selected when the graphical edge and graphical node are being selected. So we should notify something above us that actually something was selected. And instead of putting that directly to the scene with the PyQt signal, we will keep it in some level in between. So that's our graphical scene, which is here. So we can go ahead and create new functions or new PyQt signals. And the first one will be item selected. And also later it can happen that we have items deselected. So I will create two of them. The first one, item selected, is gonna equal to PyQt signal, and items deselected is gonna be PyQt signal again. However, we still do not want to force the user of the API to get connected to the scene with dot to the graphical scene to some events here. So we will provide an interface in our node scene for that also. But first of all, once we got item selected, we can go to the node. We can comment this one out, and on selected we can say self.node.scene.graphical scene item selected emit. And this way we will trigger this PyQt5 signal in our graphical scene. The same thing will go here for the edge. So let's do that. Here has to be an edge, so self edge scene graphical scene item selected emit, and this way it will happen that the graphical scene will have these two PyQt signals being triggered. So for now I will close the graphic scene because we don't need it anymore, and let's go ahead to our scene. Here we have has been modified and also has been modified listeners. So it will make sense to create a new underscore item underscore selected listeners. That's gonna equal to empty list again, and items underscore deselected listeners. That's gonna be empty again. We got add has been modified listener, so we can do the same function here. It's a helper function, so add item selected listener self and callback, and self underscore item selected listeners dot append callback, and the same thing for the items deselected. So define add items deselected listeners callback, and again just self dot underscore items deselected listeners append callback. Nice. Now once we got these events, we can connect to them in our scene. So self.gr scene dot item selected connect, and here's gonna be a name of our function which is going to handle the item selected. So self.on item selected. And again we are using the on here before to provide a hint that it's actually an event. So define on item selected, and we can print that the scene got on item selected, and the same thing will go for on items deselected, and we can print out the same thing, just say on items deselected like this one, and just do items deselected connect on items deselected like this. So let's try out if it actually works. Open a new file. Okay. Scene on item selected. Scene on item selected. And as you can see, I can select it multiple times or click it multiple times, and the item selected is not being triggered. And when I do the deselection, nothing happened because we didn't implement it yet. So that's gonna be everything for this part. I thank you for watching, and we will continue at the next part.